Hey, pretty girls, it's your girl Evangelist Britt, and you're tuned in to the Pretty Girls Heal podcast. Here we're healing together, one story at a time, removing the limits from our past and becoming exactly who God has called us to be. So, today's episode is going to be a lot different from any of the other episodes. We are starting our grief series. I've actually fought doing this series just simply because I know that I am still actively grieving multiple people. And so this has been a very vulnerable subject for me. But I do realize that I am not the only one that is going through a grief journey. Um, and people should really know what grief really looks like. And I don't have to hide my grief or hide behind my grief. It's okay. um, Today we're talking about my dad. And what you're going to hear for the most part is clips from another project that I was working on that I chose not to be a part of because I simply wasn't ready. But I did do the groundwork for this project. So I decided, because it was so raw and so real and so uncut, that I would go ahead and incorporate it into this series. And my hope in doing this is to inspire and encourage as always. Um, I hope that I reach people who are going through the very things that I have gone through, that I am going through, the emotions, the feelings. We're going to tackle all of that as I continue to work through my journey. Um, that's why this podcast is called Pretty Girls Healing, because I am a pretty girl healing, and I'm healing from multiple things. I'm healing from past and present. So just bear with me on this episode because, again, it's not going to be like the other ones. But I know that this is needed, and it's needed from more of a perspective of, oh, there are 5 stages of grief, and we're going to go over those 5 stages and how complex and complicated it can be. But here is the raw, the real, and the uncut. Stay tuned. Um, if I have to be honest, grief is probably the weirdest thing that I have ever had to do. Um, to know me is to know that death is simply a part of life in my mind. I've always had the understanding that anything living will eventually die. It's not about the fact that you will one day pass away, it's about living your life on purpose. Um, Losing my dad has been a very weird journey. Um, the healing process has been very long and very frustrating. Um, because I have realized that grief is not linear, that it is very complicated, it's very complex. One day you could be in the stage of acceptance, and the next you are in denial, or you're angry, or you're bargaining. Um, and my dad's death was very different in the way certain things took place. Um, I last saw my dad May of 2023. Um, that day, I felt on the inside that this would actually be the last time that I saw my dad. But I kept trying to like block it out of my mind or tell myself that I'm just tripping. But it was just something that really felt spiritual. But I just remember knowing that this would be the last time that I saw my dad. It wasn't the last time that I talked to him, but it would be the last time that I saw him. Um, and then last spoke to him Father's Day of 2023. And my last words to my dad in life was, I love you. And he was upset with me. I didn't know why at the time. I did find out after he passed away. But he was upset with me. Something he misconstrued, miscommunication. Um, he didn't say it back. And I remember just sitting in my car crying because I've been fighting for so long to have my dad in my life. I hadn't talked to him before that year. I hadn't talked to him um, in 15 years. Before 2022, I had not talked to my dad in 15 years. He came back and he was back for about 11 months. And again, he just stopped talking to me. He stopped answering my phone calls. And like I said, when I talked to him on Father's Day, um, I knew essentially that would be the last time that I talked to him. But again, I was trying to block that out of my mind. I would call him several more times and he just wouldn't answer the phone. And I would eventually stop calling. My dad called me in September at about 2 o'clock in the morning. And it just kind of seemed weird. And I'm like, I don't know what the issue is, but I'm not arguing with anybody at 2 o'clock in the morning. And I just didn't answer the phone. I now know that he was calling me because he needed help. Um, if I could go back, I would have answered the phone. But again, in spirit, knowing what I knew, I used to tell my dad that you got to stop calling me and my siblings every time you need help, but you're not there any other time. Because my dad had this thing about anytime he felt like he was going to die in a situation, he would call us to run to the rescue. And we would always show up. And I used to tell him, I said, Dad, you gotta learn how to be in our lives when there's nothing going on, because one of these days you're gonna call and none of us are gonna be in position to hear you. And I had said that to him many years ago. For it to happen just that way, none of us was in position to come to the rescue this time. And it was to his detriment. Um, the day before he passed away, I was at home. It was a Sunday. And just out of nowhere, I began to pray for him. And I mean, I was down on my face, prostrate before the Lord, crying out. And I'm like, God, I don't care if I never hear from him again. I don't care if I never see him again. But Lord, I just need you to save his soul. Like, don't let him leave this world unsaved. And for almost the last 2 years now, that has been my question. Like, did God really hear my prayer? I didn't realize that my dad would die the next day. Um, but the next day felt so weird and so strange for me because here I am. I began to call him and he never answered the phone. Um, all day Monday, I called and I called and I called, and I'm like, if I could just get him to answer the phone. And it's almost strange because at a certain time, which I later found out was his time of death, I felt my heart crush. It was a physical feeling of my heart breaking. And I went through the rest of the day like that. And when I got home, some type of peace kind of came over me, but I began to sing the song I Shall Wear a Crown. And some days now I'm thinking that me singing that song at random um, was God's way, could have been God's way of telling me that He had answered my prayer. No one called me when my dad died that Monday. And that Tuesday, I woke up and I was just an emotional wreck. Still didn't know my dad was gone. Um, went to work and I called my mother and I said, something's not right. And I think my dad is dead. My mother, thinking that I'm just overthinking, she just kind of brushes it off and tells me that she's going to call me back. About 2 hours later, I'm sitting at my desk. I happen to look down at my phone and I see a Facebook Messenger notification. And as I'm reading this message, everything around me kind of just disappears, as though I am the only person in the room at this moment. And it literally felt like everything else just disappeared or stood still. And as I'm reading this message, I keep going over the line, your dad passed away yesterday. I begin to call the person, they don't answer. I call his wife, she never answers. I call his phone, it is now disconnected. And I am shocked, and eventually shock turns into pure hysterics. This was so out of body for me because it's like, okay, God, why did you have to let me be right about this? Like, was this you trying to prepare me? Was this you warning me? Like, what was all of it? Like, why? Um, and because I know that life has to end at any given moment for everybody, wasn't about him dying. For the last year and some change, almost 2 years, I have constantly asked God about my dad's soul. I have dealt with the grief of his passing because for some reason, that saying you can't miss what you never had is so incorrect for me. Because why do I miss him so much? I didn't miss my dad the 15 years that he wasn't around. I didn't miss him as much as I do now. And what I've been able to conclude is that his death was so finite. Because I remember like a couple of days after he passed away, I said, well, one thing I know for sure is this is the last time that I'll ever have to cry about him leaving me. This is the last time that I'll have to experience this type of pain of him leaving me. But I had so many regrets because I'm like, had I known that what I was feeling was going to be so, I would have done everything that I could have to make sure that we reconciled. I wouldn't have been so afraid to ask him why he was angry with me and try to fix whatever it was that he said I had done, even if I was in the wrong, just so I could cherish the last few moments that I would have with him. Um, but my takeaways from my dad's death is this, or from my dad in general. I didn't realize until after he passed away that this man taught me how to love unconditionally because I was someone who didn't believe in love. I didn't believe in telling people I love you. If you told me you loved me, I kind of would side eye you. I didn't believe that I could be loved. Um, and regardless of who I couldn't love, for whatever reason, I always loved my dad. Always a daddy's girl. And when it was good between my dad and I, it was good. Um, and I was definitely a daddy's girl. Um, but he taught me how to love someone who is hard to love. He taught me how to love in places where love isn't always reciprocated because I had to love him. And God wouldn't allow me not to love him. Out of everybody else that I struggled to love in my life, God would not allow me not to love my dad, regardless of what he did, didn't do, who he was. I still loved him. Another thing is that I don't make excuses for my dad or anything that he did, but I would often look at my dad and some things that he would open up to me about in later years. Um, my dad was a tortured soul. My dad walked around with a broken heart. Um, and there were some things that would never be reconciled in his life. Um, there were certain times where I could see the little boy crying out and my dad come out. Um, but here's the thing, us as the children, um, I have since let go of the guilt of this, but sometimes we look at our parents like they are supposed to be our heroes, which they are. They are supposed to be our saviors in this world. Um, and we forget that they had lives before us. And a lot of times things happen that in our culture was just swept under the rug, it wasn't dealt with. And I think that if I would have stopped for a moment and thought to myself that my dad was fighting his own demons, I think I would have been a lot quicker to forgive. I would have stayed present in his life. Um, I would have fought harder. And I hope that my dad knew when he left here that I did love him because I fought hard to not only love my dad, but to show him that I loved him. Um, what I would say to parents, although we don't come with instruction manuals, being a child doesn't come with instruction manual either. I beg of you, when you are starting families and when you are having children, that you go and you heal from those things that broke you so that those things don't break your children. And in the event, children, that you feel like you got to heal from damage of your parents or from your parents, and you feel like you have to go no contact or you feel like you have to remove yourself, the only thing I beg of you is to make sure that even in the no contact, that for yourself, that you are forgiving them so that you're not holding on to all of this stuff and calling yourself trying to heal. But if there is space in your healing journey for you to forgive and reconcile, if you can look past your parents' faults, if you can look past your parents' faults, do that. I'm learning in life with both of my parents that, again, they had lives before I got here. And life did what life does. It lifed for the both of them. And we as the children may not always understand that things may have happened to them. And they were not raised in times where they could just go sit on the couch and talk it out. They weren't raised in times where communication was key. Everything literally was swept under the rug. You just moved on. And so, if that's you, parents, we are now in a time where it's okay to say, I'm not okay. It's okay to admit that I didn't always get it right. And it's okay to go and talk to somebody and get the help that you need so that your kids don't have to carry the burden of your pain. And even after you heal, life still isn't going to be perfect because life is going to life regardless of what you do. But I would rather have gotten my dad the help that he needed, gotten us the help that we needed. And when he closed his eyes on this side, I would have rather have been able to be there. I would have rather had closure because there are now questions that I'll never have answered. I didn't get to say goodbye to my dad. I didn't get to really see my dad off because of the circumstances revolving around his death. Um, I had my own service for him, and I eulogized my dad. And one thing that I said is that holding grudges and unforgiveness is such a thief of time because it wastes so much time and energy that you can never get back. And 75 years, which is how old my dad was when he died, 75 years seems like a long time until it's just 75 years. And the reason I say that is because I looked at what I was hearing about my dad's life. I looked at what everyone was saying he did with this 75 years. And I've never heard of a person passing away with unfulfilled purpose in this manner. And so it got me to thinking like, okay, if I am blessed to live 75 years, and at the time I was 35, so if I am blessed to live to 75, that gives me 40 years. And I asked myself, what have I done in this 35 years? And what can I do if given 40, what can I do if given 40 minutes to make sure that I have lived my life on purpose? Um, and so that day I made a vow that every day I was going to live my life on purpose. I was going to go after the things that I wanted. I was going to do the things that I wanted. I was going to love extremely hard. I was going to open myself up to possibilities, to relationships, friendships. Um, and it hasn't been perfect. I'm going to be honest with you. It hasn't been perfect. I have had to end more relationships than I have been able to salvage. I have had to go contact with my entire family outside of my mother, like for my own healing and for my own peace. I've had to close more doors than I've opened. But you know what? God is showing me that He's just making room for what He's about to bless me with because I am moving on purpose. I'm moving with purpose. And so this was more so my journey in reflecting because I have to reflect over my dad. As Father's Day comes, his birthday is next week. And then I head into preparing myself for his 2-year anniversary. Um, but I am not grieving this year. I am making a decision that I am going to be at peace because I serve a God who doesn't make mistakes. I'm going to find my smile. And that's not to say that I won't shed a few tears. That's not to say that I won't have my moments, um, because I'm human. But what I will say is that it is definitely time for me to get back to life. I have to understand that regardless of all of the prayers that I prayed, that he chose his path and now I'm choosing mine. I hope and I pray that my dad is resting in God's arms. I hope and I pray that his soul was truly saved and that he got to experience salvation before he left this world. Um, I want to send a special shout out to all of the fathers who continue to show up for their children. Um, I honor that. I honor that. One thing I love to see is a father and his children, especially a daddy's girl. I absolutely love it. Um, I want to say Happy Father's Day to all of those fathers who are doing their big one for their children. I want to wish my dad a happy birthday wherever you are. Um, I hope that you found peace in your life, um, because now I have to be at peace with the decisions God made for you. I know that this is going to sound weird, but I'm glad my dad was my dad in a way because I learned more from having to love him hard than I think I would have ever learned. Um, and I am truly at peace. So, till next time, this was just my diary. This really wasn't even supposed to be an episode, but yeah. Until next time, y'all be blessed. All right, y'all. So that was one of the clips from the project that I was working on. What I didn't get to do for that project was really go in depth about my dad and I's relationship. Um, our relationship for the first 13 months of my life, I'm sure my dad would have been the dad that every little girl dreams of having. He spoiled me, he loved me. My dad has never called me by my name. I have always had a nickname, whether it was Boo, Baby Girl, or his favorite, which was his Sweet Finger. Um, if you know me, then you know that I do have a physical deformity. My left hand, I only have a thumb. So he called that finger his sweet finger. Um, he and my mother split up when I was about 13 months old. It really didn't have anything to do with me as to why they didn't make it. If I'm being honest, my father was an abusive man to every woman that he was ever with. Um, and I was simply a pawn. My dad knew that the only way that he could get to my mother is if he threatened to do something to me. I was kidnapped at 14 months, and she had to come back or he was going to kill me. His words. And so my mother did whatever she had to do to keep me alive because that was always his threat. And we never really knew whether or not he was going to do it or not. So she did what she felt like she needed to do, which was come back, endure the abuse. And the last time she fled, she hid me to where he couldn't get a hold of me. And she got free. Um, she still, ironically enough, let me go around him every so often. Um, and things happened while I was there in his care. And at the age of 4, those visits, they got cut short. And I wouldn't see my dad again until I was about 9 years old, going on 10. And the crazy part is my daddy would never really take ownership of the things that happened as to why he wasn't a part of my life for those 5 years. But, I knew the truth. He knew the truth. And that was all that mattered to me. But I would always, when it came to him, even as a little girl, just try to move forward from the present moment. You're here now, you're trying now, you know, but it never seemed like it was good enough because something would always happen and my dad would say or do something to me and I would stop talking to him and his apology would be to send me a check in the mail. And these checks will range anywhere from $100 to $1,000. It just depends on how bad the trauma was. This lasted until I was in my 20s. Actually, till I was 20. Um, when I was 18, I started to realize that this was not a normal relationship. This was not a normal father daughter relationship, that you can't buy forgiveness, you can't buy love. And by me being so young at the time, of course, I'm 10, 11, 12 years old walking around with $100 check, or I got $500 because my daddy said something crazy and this was the way that he apologized to me. I didn't realize that that is not normal, nor is it healthy until I was 18 and I just got tired of it. And so at 18, when he would send these checks, he did something really big. He called me out of my name in a very derogatory term that I will not repeat. Um, and that was $1,000 worth. He sent me $1,000 check that time. And I did not cash that check for a while. I mean, it was almost expired by the time I actually cashed that check. And to be honest, the only reason I cashed that check because at the time we needed the check in my household. Because other than that, I would have never cashed it. Um, at 20 years old, my dad got sick. He had already had one amputation when I was a child of his leg, and he needed the other leg amputated. I was at work one day. I get a phone call to this day. I don't know how this man got my work number, but I get a phone call stating that I needed to come to the hospital. He needs to have surgery, but he will not get on the table until I am there at the hospital with him. I was so far away from the hospital, there was no way that I would even make it for him to in time for him to safely wait for me to get there. So they ended up actually having to sedate my dad so that they could do this surgery. At that point, he was in the care of his wife, so she approved him going ahead and getting the surgery, and I would be there after the surgery. So, after he comes out of surgery, the leg has been amputated. They now can't get him to eat. Therefore, he's not getting any better. And so they end up pulling me and his wife and my brother, and we talk about it, and I'm like, okay, so what is the reason that he's not eating? And apparently he just didn't like the hospital food. Like, there was nothing wrong. He just didn't like hospital food. And I was like, well, let me see if I can talk to him. I go in and I say, hey daddy, why you not eating? What's going on? Couldn't find out the man was just spoiled. He didn't want the hospital food. They really weren't keen back in those days of letting you bring outside food into the hospitals. But of course, me being baby girl, to the rescue, I go, I talk to the nurse, I talk to the doctor, and I say, if I try to keep it as healthy as possible, can I just bring him food so that he will eat something? And of course, they pulled some strings, they got some approvals, and I was able to bring him food. It could only be me to bring him food. The other family members could not. Um, but I brought his food every day, several times a day. Um, and there was a day that he wanted a bag of oranges. Not just one orange, he wanted a bag of oranges. Now, my father was diabetic at the time. They were like, no, you cannot bring those oranges here. And I went back in the room and I told him, and this man cussed me out. And it was his MO. When he would start to feel better after he would get us to the hospital, me and my siblings, and we would get him on the mend and he was feeling better, something would happen that didn't go his way, and this would be the outcome. And this man cussed me out so bad about oranges to the point to where I literally just fought back my tears. The nurse came in to calm him down. And as she was leaving out after she calmed him down, I went ahead and I left. She was outside his door and she just simply asked me, which I think she already knew the answer, but she just simply asked me, "So, will I see you tomorrow?" And I said, "No, I don't think I'm going to come back. But if possible, do you think you can just keep me updated on it?" And she could see the tears in my eyes, but I'm trying so hard not to let these tears fall. She was like, "I'm really not supposed to, but for you and knowing the circumstance," she was like, "I do the best that I can." And she called me every day to give me an update until he was released from the hospital. And that's how I kept up with him, and that's how I knew he was okay. Um, and of course, a couple of months go down the line, and I get a check in the mail, like I always do, and I never cash that check. I didn't see my dad for another year or so, almost 2 years. And during that time, we fell out again. And this time, I just remember praying and asking God to let it remain. It's down this time. We're not in communication. And just leave it that way because I'm tired of fighting God. I literally told God, like, "You're my father. I don't need you." And I lived 15 years and I did not have my father. Um, I would check the obituary to see if he was alive. I talked to my grandmother a lot till she passed. I talked to my aunt. She would always tell me, "Yeah, I just talked to him on such and such day. He's okay." Got in touch with my sister, and we have the same type of relationship. Actually, at this moment, we don't speak. But yeah, for 15 years, I went through that. I went through finding some things out that I wish that I could have gone the rest of my life and not knowing about my dad. When I say devastated, yeah. So how do I go from all of that to this man comes back in my life for all of a year, and now I'm grieving him, right? He comes back and he's there and he gets mad and it's the same cycle. And in this cycle, I just reconcile with myself that, look, I've done everything that I can to be a daughter to this man. I have done everything that if he closes his eyes today, I did not have any regrets about who I was as a daughter to him. I've never really told a lot of people what he was angry with me about before he passed away. Um, right before he passed away, that last time that I saw him, I lost my job. Just randomly lost my job, and I had a bill due. He paid the bill. I told him that as soon as I started working again, I would have his money to him. And that was understandable. Now, mind you, all of my life, he's just given me money when he's done something. And this one time that I fell on hard times and he paid one bill for me, and the bill was $217. This is what this man stopped talking to me over. $217. And I said, "You know what? As soon as I can get him his money, I am going to send him his money." I didn't know um I didn't know what he was speculating about this $217 because what he was telling people versus what actually happened was that I didn't have a bill and I probably, didn't lose my job, whatever. and I just got $217 from him. And that is a weird number to just get from somebody. So I just said, you know what, I've done everything that I can to be a daughter to this man. If he dies today or tomorrow, I do not have any regrets about what I have done as far as being a daughter to him. When he passed, nobody called me. And there's a lot of speculation around his death that it wasn't natural causes, if you can read between those lines, allegedly. Um, when I talked to his wife finally, it was about 2 weeks after he passed away. And I asked her what happened. Now, by this time, I've already talked to the VA. I have already found the funeral home that he was at. Well, with the funeral home situation, I will definitely get into that because that was crazy. But when I finally got a hold of this woman, my first question to her was, what happened? Because I've been trying to call you and I've not gotten a response from you. What happened to my dad? First words out of her mouth, I kid you not. Your dad was going to divorce me and he never got the chance. Um Initially I flew into rage. Then she started giving me a rundown on things that didn't make sense. And from the medical history that I knew from my dad, what I had already gotten from the VA hospital information, nothing made sense. So essentially, I am trying to figure all of this out. I am trying to put all of these pieces together. Um, I had already found his body before she called, but the problem was she had already signed off on him being cremated, and so had the ME. They did not find any foul play, so they went ahead and they signed off on his body. We were trying to get them to hold off on the cremation because we wanted an autopsy. But by her being the wife, she had the upper hand. And so by the time I got somebody to listen to me, even if I had got a court order, he was already scheduled to be cremated like within hours. So there was nothing that I could do. So there are no answers there. Um, some time later, I needed some forms from him, from his death and from his time in the VA. And I ended up having to call the funeral home because I knew for a fact they had those papers. And that was the easiest way that I would have been able to get that information. And so I called the funeral home and I talked to what would have been his funeral director. And I asked him, I said, so did y'all just like do an immediate cremation on my dad? Was there a service? Do you have a copy of an obituary that I can have? Because I looked on your website and there was never an announcement. And the crazy part about this is like grief is so weird because I was still in denial months later. And so I didn't even believe that my dad was dead. Now, mind you, I have talked to the county that my dad lived in. They have confirmed his death to me. I have access to the death certificate that says that he's deceased. Um, so my last ditch effort is like talking to this funeral director, and when he told me that he had these forms and he was telling me that, my dad was his situation was the coldest situation that he's ever dealt with when it came to finalizing arrangements for someone. He said, I begged his wife for information that we could put in an obituary. Um, there was no service. There was nothing. There was really not even any discussion other than she wanted him cremated. I do remember that at some point she had called and asked me if I wanted a necklace with his ashes. Um, Never got that. And to this day, I do not know if his ashes were ever even picked up. I haven't heard from her since she called to inform me that her father passed away. Um, but I haven't heard from her. So I don't know if she ever even picked up his ashes, but it doesn't sound like it from the conversation that I had with his director. And the funny thing about that for me is that I actually inadvertently fired a therapist behind these ashes, because to know me is to know that I don't do any part of afterlife. Once we close the casket, once we say goodbye, I'm done. But um, I had a therapist who suggested that I call the funeral home and I asked if his wife picked up the remains. And if not, I was to go and get his remains, because my father never wanted to be cremated. He had a Purple Heart, so he wanted to be buried with all of his medals and his honors, and he wanted to be buried in the VA cemetery. That was, in his words, his last honor from the country. Um, but the lady kept laughing. She was like, "Yeah, ha, 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 just go and get the remains, and then you take them to the VA and have him laid to rest." And like she just kept laughing, and I don't know what it was about that situation, but at first, I guess grief again will make you do some crazy things. So at first, I was like, "Okay, I'm gonna go and call, and if they have his ashes, I'm going to get his ashes and take them to the VA and have him buried where he's supposed to be, and see if they can get his Purple Hearts or whatever and his medals, and see if I can get him properly laid to rest like it was my goal." But here's the thing. I get back to my desk and I can't get this laugh out of my mind after this session. And then I start thinking, like, Brittany, if you call this funeral home and they say that she hasn't picked these ashes up, and you decide that you are now going to assume responsibility for your dad's remains, who's going to actually go and pick him up? Because I don't do funeral homes. I don't care for cemeteries. So who's going to go and pick him up? And I've never touched an urn in my life. I've seen them, but I've never touched an urn in my life. I don't care how saved I am. I don't care what I can preach, what I can talk about. Like, for me, I just don't do afterlife. So whose car is he going in? And so I was like, this man was too big to get in my car when he was alive. This man was 6'7" when he was alive. And he couldn't fit in my car. And he sure can't fit in my car now. And so the next time I see her, she's like pressing up on me about whether or not I went and got his ashes. And I was like, I really am gonna have to find closure another way, because yeah, I just don't do funeral homes and cemeteries and urns and ashes. Like, I don't even believe in cremation. Like, that's just not for me. And she keeps pushing up, and I mean, for whatever reason, I don't know if her nerves were bad, but she could not stop laughing in this situation. And finally, I was just like, this isn't gonna work out, because my goals and what you're trying to do just simply don't align. And I never saw her again. But that's my story of my life with my dad, and the grief behind this has just been his soul. It hasn't been him dying. As I said in the clips, everybody has to go. But I just hope and I pray that God really did answer my prayer. I hope that at some point, because my father, unfortunately, he died the way many of us would not want to die. He died afraid and alone. Um, but I just hope and I pray that in that time he had time to really talk to God, and I hope that he was able to turn his soul over to God. And I hope God received him. Listen, I don't have a heaven or hell to put anybody in, regardless of who my father was. I still loved him. And I finally gotten to the place that I'm not ashamed that I loved my father despite who he was, in spite of what he did and didn't do. I loved him. He was my dad. And I know that I'm not making excuses for why he was the way he was, but life takes us in certain places. And if we don't get help, if we don't acknowledge that things happen, then we all stand a chance of leaving this world the same way he did. And that's why I I want to live on purpose. That's why I want to live every day and love everybody that I can. That's why I want to live a forgiving life. And I want to make sure that I am found doing what God would call me to do, what He would have me to do. Um, I have forgiven my dad even in death. And I have still prayed. I may never hear it audibly that God received him, but I know the God that I serve. And I just know that if my dad could have just given one sentence to God, if he just gave God one sentence, I know God did it. Um, I'm trusting and I'm just crazy enough to believe that God answered my prayer. Um, I don't know what happened in my dad's final moments and his final days, but I pray that my daddy is resting. My daddy's birthday is Sunday, June the 22nd. And my prayer is that my daddy is resting, that I continue to heal. And listen, I have other people in my family who have not healed from him, but I pray that God will open their heart and that God will heal them too. And my other prayer is that this episode will find who it needs to find. I pray that this episode will find that daughter or that son whose father is still alive. I pray that this episode will find that father that still has time to reconcile with their children, to say I'm sorry because we need to hear it. My daddy did say I'm sorry at some point without the checks. Um, I pray that there's a father out there that will hear this, who will call their daughter up or their son and acknowledge what has happened and simply say, I'm sorry, and open the door for your children to come to you and for you to heal those broken pieces in your children. I learned the hard way I can have all of the degrees, I could have all the cars, all the houses, all the whatevers. But there is something about a daughter needing their father, no matter whether we admit it or not. Um, there's something about a father being there, and there is something about a father saying, I'm sorry, I didn't get it right, that heals the children in us. Um, so that's why I'm doing this, because I don't want anybody to unnecessarily feel what I feel on a daily basis. Um, Grief is hard either way you look at it. And I just think that if you're able to fix something before you have to grieve it, it makes that process a lot easier. Um, I would have much rather just simply missed good times with my dad. And I do have good times with my dad that I can remember. And there are some times that I still sit back and I laugh at those times, or I'm just like, why couldn't all the times be like that? You know, there were times when my dad was a huge Astros fan, and I would sit and watch the game. And when the game would be really good, just to annoy him because he called himself the work from home coach. And just to annoy him when the games would get real good and something would be going on, I would call him and he was gonna answer the phone anyway. And I'd be like, "Hey, Daddy, what you doing?" And he would just hang up or he would fuss, but we would laugh about it because he'd be like, "You wait just until the game is getting good and then you call me." Same thing with his Rockets, and don't let the Texans and the Cowboys be playing each other. Listen, he was going to lose his mind. But I had good times with my dad. And that's all I have to live off of with my dad. Um, the physical things that I have, I have little trinkets of his. I have a hat that he gave me. I have some other things that he insisted that I have, and now I see why. But to be honest with you, when the relationship is broken and a parent dies, those things do not fill the void. I don't think that the void would be so deep had our relationship healed, because now I have to heal from the relationship and his passing. And there's no chance to go back and get it right. Death is final. And that's why in his eulogy, I said 75 years seems like a long time until it's just 75 years. It seems like he lived a long life. But guys, outside of what I know that he taught me, I can't tell you what he did with his life. I can't tell you what he did. And that is very transparent of me to want anybody listening to this episode, out of any episode that I will ever make, this episode, I want you to hear my heart that God is giving you opportunity to live on purpose, to leave your mark in this world. Whatever that looks like. And listen, you're going to leave a mark. My dad left a mark. It just wasn't a positive mark. He left a mark in this world. But what is your mark going to be? If God allows me to live to be 75 years old or older, I pray that he gives me more time. But what if today was today? What would be my story? What would be my mark on this earth? Whose life have I impacted? What changes have I made? So we got to live to be the change that we desire to see in this world. And parents, it starts with you. Children, it starts with you. We got to learn how to love each other right. We got to learn to forgive. And I'm not saying that just because you forgive that you got to keep going through stuff with people. There are people in this world that I forgive. And listen, you haven't grieved until you grieved the living. Somebody that you right down the street from, that a simple I'm sorry could fix it, and neither one of you can reach one another. You've not grieved until you grieved the living. But what I am saying is we've got to learn how to forgive one another, to love one another, and make decisions on how we are going to heal and move forward. Every I'm sorry, every I forgive you is not indicative of I have to let you back in my life. It's just saying that, you know what, I release you from this and I release me from this, so that when we have to grieve, when we have to grieve people that can't come back, it's not so hard. Because let me tell you, had I not forgiven my dad, this probably would have tormented me all the more. But I only grieve what I don't know, and I grieve what I wish could have happened, which is I wish that $217 would not have been what ruined the relationship between me and my dad. But you know what? To God be the glory that He is a healing God, that He is a father to the fatherless, a mother to the motherless. And so, God, I thank you. I thank you for moments of healing. I thank you for this grief journey, God. I thank you for loving me when I didn't feel the love of my father. God, I thank you for being that for me and being that for so many other people that needed God. And I ask that anything that I did that was not of you, God, that you would forgive me. And anything that anybody else has done that was not in the name of honoring their parents, God, that you would forgive them. But God, I also come and I pray for that parent that doesn't see their wrongdoing. I come right now, God, and I pray for that parent who is falling short and that is blind to the hurt that they have caused their children, oh God. And I come and I ask that you would just open their eyes and let them see that even as adults, their children need them, and that you would heal those broken places in them, oh God. That for every daughter and every son, God, that we would stand in the gap right now in the name of Jesus, God. And that they would be healed, oh God, that they would be restored, oh God. That you would continue to show them that you love them. Even when they can't trace the love of a parent, they can always trace your love, oh God. I ask that these moments, oh God, that you would just let them see you in these moments, oh God, and see your hand in these moments, oh God, and that you would just continue to do a work in all of us. It's in your precious Son, Jesus' name, I pray and I say amen. Listen, if there is something in this episode that has inspired you, that has encouraged you, please share this episode with someone that needs to hear it. I'm not even asking to share this episode on a public platform. Send this episode to somebody's inbox to say, hey, you need to hear this because you can heal from this. Send this to somebody that is broken so that the door can be open for God to put them back together again, because it's possible. Your grief, your go through is not in vain. I don't have a closing today. Listen, I will see you guys next week. And I just want you all to be blessed and let's heal in Jesus' name.
I wish you were still. No more pain and no more sorrow. This don't feel real. Wish it was more time.